Hoena, ka tātua tahi mi hati tēnei kia koutou katoa. Ko taimei runga hoki tēnei kaupapa ki mui a tātu. Huri oku te wa tātou nei whakaaro ki te runga roa, nā te mea i tukuna mai ki rungi a tātou nei te koro wai wairua. I haka mahane te hoki tēnei kaupapa tino miharu. Nō reira, e te atua kaharawa, a whakakotahitia ngā kau me te hinengaro au pononga. Whakatūria mai tō take nui, kia mau tonu i au whakahau, kia noho tūturu i roto i tāu ture. E te atua kau mātou nei whakarea rea tu engari, ara haina mātou nei hikoitanga ki te maramatanga tō whakaaro nui. Kia hari aia mātou nei ngā kau ki tō aroha, he pono koa, ko koe hoki tō mātou nei kaiawhina, tō mātou nei ariki. A turuturu ātai, turuturu auta, a whano, hana mai te toki au me hui e.
Tai ki e. Tēnā koe matua, and tēnā koutou to all of our attendees online. No mai haere mai ki te Māori and Antarctica seminar series. Ko Billy Van Utrecht tōku ingoa, and I'm the logistics guy for the series. So any of the hoha that you have with registering and getting onto Zoom is entirely my fault. So Kaumatua te Warihi, and Dr. Priscilla Wehi will introduce the kaupapa very shortly. But I just want to set out the logistics for engaging through this sort of forum. So we were planning to do this, build this kōrero through a maraitua and leading into a national, a hui of national significance. While that COVID has sort of meant that we can't really do that. So while we're not kanohi ki te kanohi and there's issues around that, there are some benefits. And we have this massive reach around the motu, and we're able to bring some experts together more so than we would have if it was face-to-face. So there's a few benefits there. And hopefully you can see that the seminars are designed to do exactly that. To make the conversation a two-way street, so we have a question and answer sort of session towards the end. And so if you have any questions that are popping up throughout the seminar, please use the Q&A section down the bottom. If you click on that link, it'll pop up, and you'll have the option to vote questions that you think are really important to the top, so that when we come to question time, we'll deal with those. It's important to recognise that this is just the start of the kōrero, so this seminar series just kicks us off, and then in a couple of weeks' times, we have a scheduled wānanga for hapu and iwi to sort of come together, so there can be a bit more two-way street in the conversation. I think one of the other important things or benefits of this process is that we can now see that there's a massive interest across Antarctic research institutions. So researchers and scientists who are working in Antarctica are really keen to jump on board this kaupapa, and we've got a lot of those people joining online. I would just say that the original intent is that for hapu and iwi to have a conversation, and that's really the audience that the presentations are directed at. So just keep that in mind. But please ask your questions. And what we might do is have a separate session for Antarctic researchers and scientists who are keen to jump on board with the kaupapa, have a wānanga in a couple of weeks' time as well. So without further ado, I might just introduce Dr. Priscilla Wehi to kick off the kaupapa for us all and introduce us all to the research team more broadly. Kia ora.
Okay, kia ora everybody. It's just awesome to see all of you here, even though I can't see your faces. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm just going to talk a little bit about the background to this project so that we can get a feel for the overall kind of kaupapa. So back in 2017, the Ross Sea Marine Protected Area came into being. And New Zealand was one of the countries that really drove that through. It had to be agreed by a whole lot of different nations around the world that had an interest in Antarctica. And it was a really big step forward in protecting the Ross Sea. So with that new marine protected area coming into being, a 5-year project was then funded through the government, through the Ministry of Business, Innovation and Employment, to monitor the Ross Sea Marine Protected Area and work out how effective it was, what was working and what wasn't working well. And as part of that project, we thought it really important to have a very active vision mātauranga stream that really tapped into mātauranga and connected with Māori communities and created a much stronger partnership in terms of the interests and aspirations of New Zealanders around the Ross Sea, and really engaged with communities. So for the Vision Mātauranga strand, which I lead, we thought that the best way of beginning that, and so when I say we, I'm talking about the partners that we went into the whole project with, which are Ngāi Tahu and Ngāti Wai, so I'd particularly like to acknowledge them. But we wanted to really create a research program that was relevant and important for our communities right across the motu. And so we decided to do that by thinking about traditional ways of doing research. So not just in terms of writing words on a page, but thinking about the ways that Māori have passed down research through the many, many centuries, and the different kinds of knowledge that are embedded within the Māori community, and how that might be relevant to a research program on Antarctica. So we have future seminars, so another one at 3 o'clock this afternoon that will talk a lot about voyaging and that kind of connection. But we started with Whakairo, because in our minds that was the most appropriate place to begin a Vision Mātauranga project, thinking about research and thinking about Māori communities. And so to do that, we connected with some very highly regarded carvers in Ngāti Wai and in Ngāi Tahu. So 3 of whom are here today, so Te Warihi Hetaraka, but also James York and Potama Hetaraka, who went down to Antarctica as part of this project, supported by Antarctica New Zealand and Ngāi Tahu. And so they're going to talk more about the perspectives and what they were intending to embed into the Whakairo, and what that, where they're going to talk about their ideas and what they were thinking in terms of creating something that brought in ideas both from a Western science kind of perspective, but also with that very strong mātauranga strand that was woven. So these 2 different strands woven together, and how they could speak to each other in a conversation, and the common goals and the common values that are also embedded in that Whakairo. So I'm not going to go on too much, because I think the real people that you probably want to listen to here, and that I want to listen to, are the people who were most intimately associated with the project. And so I'm going to pass over to Te Warihi just to talk a little bit before we open it up to James and Potama, and also Vanessa Wells, who accompanied them and documented the journey. So Te Warihi, kia ora.
Kia ora, yeah. And I think that language that Scylla was talking about earlier is enshrined in our whakapapa, and the philosophies that was handed down by our ancestors in regards to how we as a people live with our environment. And that really connects us to the wairua, the mauri of the kaupapa. And I think it's from that lens that we can sort of begin the conversation. And Whakairo has always been recognised as carrying the philosophies of our history, our ancestry, and how our people lived with the environment. And that was recorded in Whakairo. Yeah, I think that's pretty much a good beginning for this conversation.
Te Warihi, can I just ask you briefly, because many of the people here won't know you, but I know that you trained as a tohunga Whakairo, right? do you want to just talk a little bit about your background in Whakairo?
E mo hea na koe, e hara hoki te kūmara I kōrero ki te...
I know.
I just said that, you know, in the north here, we have a saying that the kumara doesn't boast of its own sweetness. But however, in situations like this, you've got to give a little bit of an explanation. I didn't train as a tohunga. I trained as a student of Whakairo. And the tohunga label came years after when I returned home to my people. And I guess my lessons began with our own people in regards to what I was just talking about earlier, the meanings of the meanings that are connected to the Whakairo patterns, styles, and then getting to understand those, and then learning the taku that we call the karakia, or taku that was connected to that, because the taku became the framework of our Mātauranga tukuiho base. Yeah.
Hey, thank you. That's really helpful, I think. And the other person I just would really like to acknowledge here as well, who's not able to join us, is Fane Robinson. So Fane from Ngaitahu was also very instrumental in helping to develop this kaupapa as well. Yeah, hey, should we pass over to James, and James and Potama can start kicking us off about the process and what it was like for you getting involved in the project and how it all panned out.
Me?
Yeah, you.
Oh, kia ora koutou. How it all panned out? Well, I suppose our first initial involvement with it was, well, I come in pretty late into the piece, and I think a lot of the kōrero had already kind of taken place. But I was approached by Fane to see if I was available to do this mahi, because I think he was pretty busy at the time, and felt like it was an awesome opportunity to do something. But along with that came a bit of responsibility, I suppose, in terms of our kōrero and stuff like that. So we had a few wānanga previous and kind of talked about a concept or what it was we were going to interpret, and kind of come up with a basic theme, and then we both, like Potama and myself, we kind of went our separate ways and did a bit of mahi on the mainland. But it was really kind of beneficial to the project to actually go down and actually get a feel for the place and finish our mahi down there. And I think it added a lot more flesh to our kōrero with both of us being down there. With our carving, so it was pretty special time actually, and lots of learning and sharing. That's what I felt with our experience down there. So felt very privileged. Yeah.
Potes, have you got anything you want to add?
Yeah. Everybody, I don't know if you can hear me. We just have to drive down the road a bit to see if I can get a better signal. So here we are. As the way I looked at this project in kaupapa was, I can't and don't want to take the credit for everything that was done down there, especially considering we try to get as many hands involved as we could in it, especially up north and amongst our carving whānau and our friends, and even some doctors had a little input into what we did in terms of the whakairo and the work we put into what we did. So I just wanted to put that out there, that I felt like for me it was more of I was just the driver. I was the deliverer. I went on this project on behalf of Te Warihi and our community, and I was fortunate enough to be to take that trip south with James and Vanessa. So that's how I looked at it. So the kaupapa was very much influenced by Te Warihi and by our community. Yeah, that's about it from what I could think of it. Great opportunity, of course. That's yeah.
So I'm thinking James and Potes, I might come back to you later on, maybe after the film. So you might want to talk a bit about what you see as the main kind of theme that's embedded in the Whakairo itself. But maybe we can think about that after the film, so you've got a bit of time to just really think about what you want to say. But Vanessa, I want to come back to you. So Vanessa also accompanied James and Potes down to the ice at the last minute. As our original comms person, Ariel, actually became hapu and had a beautiful baby and wasn't able to go. So Vanessa incredibly was able to fill that gap and do some fantastic work down there. So V, do you want to talk a bit about what that was like for you, how you saw things?
I really felt incredibly lucky because Ariel just, you know, I mean, she was a massive mix of emotions at having to pull out, and she just was so generous with sort of handing the project over, and the guys and James and Potama were just so welcoming. And you know, we sort of turned up the day before we flew south, and they had no idea who I was at all, and I didn't know them. And I think the way that it was just such a welcoming team really early on, and you and Te Warihi put a lot of work in the day before we flew away, and that was a really special day in preparing. And yeah, so I just I felt incredibly lucky the entire time. That was just amazing.
Can I just ask you something? I heard a rumour that there were some fantastic interchanges with the scientists and rumours that James and Potama were rock stars. Do you want to tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, well, normally the people that get to go to Scott Base are either like journalists and boring media people, or scientists, and so up rocked these two guys with their tools, and they took over the docking shed, which is where they did all their work. Well, their mahi was done there, and they were actually really open to interacting with everybody too. So they were just like, you know, come on in. It's such an unusual situation to be working in. And so all of these scientists and not just at Scott Base, but people from McMurdo were coming over, and they were like a tourist attraction. So you'd have, you know, sort of groups of 8 or 9 people from Americans from McMurdo coming over and wanting to know what was going on. And they were just fascinated with, you know, what they were doing, and but also they were so much fun to be down there with. So, you know, you guys really just yeah, got quite a following. It was like being there with 2 celebrities. It was great.
Okay, well, I reckon what we should do now is to watch this film. It's 15 minutes long, so it's not long, and then maybe open it up for more commentary questions afterwards. Is that okay? Or does anyone have any last thoughts they'd like to offer before we head that way? Yep. Okay, to pai. Sweet. Cool. Okay.
Kahura tangata uta, he tiaki atu ki tangata tai. Kahura tangata tai, he tiaki atu ki tangata uta. Pērā koa te wāhi o te toitoi awa whakamoe ko tūko rongo ki te whakatauira mai te tupua, mai te tawhita, mai te kāwhi o Ngāri, mai tawhiwhiki ngātu. Ui, ka tōki no te mauri a hua noa ki runga ki wene. Quiet at the moment, maybe a wee bit hungry. To me, Whakairo is our writing, our beliefs that were handed down, and our knowledge that has been handed down. Yeah.
What is carving? Well, I mean, it's kind of everything. You know, it's a cultural vessel to hold knowledge. It wasn't really just a piece of art, you know. They didn't really just carve stuff because it looked cool. There was always a story. There was always a purpose, really, for whatever you were carving.
It's about creating a visual aid to the topics of conversation that we have, a way of remembering, a way of recognising an abstract view.
Whai and Te Warihi are two of New Zealand's most respected, creative, innovative tohuna whakairo or carvers. It was just fantastic to have them on board. Whai's work is already represented at Scott Base. He carved that very significant navigator of the heavens, Te Kai Whakatere o Te Raki, that stands in front of Scott Base.
I got involved through my father. He happened to get a phone call, asked if I wanted to go. I always jumped at it. The idea of it was just out of this world.
Yeah, it's Whakairo.
I wanted him to get to feel and understand, mainly to feel the place.
This conversation needs to happen around climate change, around science, around Indigenous knowledge, and around all of humanity working together.
Whai and Te Warihi guided us in what the story was to be about. We had a general theme, but the challenge was we had very limited time, and so we had to start the mahi without having the full story. Being down there too really made us connect with the kaupapa more, and the kaupapa evolved. I think the intention was for us to go down and be inspired by the environment and the place down there. And conversations with different people really impacted on the story. One person that really impacted on my side of the story was Regina.
I really enjoyed meeting James on the ice and being able to share why we do the work that we do. And you can hear in my accent, I'm not from New Zealand originally. One thing I'm super excited about is to understand better traditional forms of knowledge, especially around the whale.
We started just talking about the whales and what her mahi was and how fragile that ecosystem is. For me, I connected with her kōrero, and I think she might have connected with ours too. The link with the network of life under the ice. Yeah, that was a prime example of modern science having an impact on what I was going to do. It all kind of went click. I was like, oh, pūna wera then. The spider's web, that's the pattern that I need to do. Really quite intrinsic, delicate, but actually very strong. It was kind of quite beautiful. It evolved like it was meant to, I think. Yeah, so that was pretty cool.
As a scientist, it's all about the connections between the different species and how the ecosystem as a whole works.
Let's say it's variable winds, you might want to make a whole circle with a little tiny entrance towards the side here.
The Whakairo was installed at Scott Base as an entrance, knowing that everyone would pass through that doorway. Whoever you are, you would be welcomed.
I think from an Indigenous perspective, yeah, we're pretty much about environment, and really it's just emphasising the connection that we have with the land, just a different way of looking at things.
This symbolises papatuanuku, and what she is wrapped in is a korowai or a cloak. Ideally, this cloak would be covering the whole of her. We should not be seeing any forms of papatuanuku. Because we can see forms of papatuanuku, it depicts that something's not quite right with the environment. The design on here, these 4 scales, the geology, flora, fauna, and the 4th scale represents moon. The name of that is Te Una He Whakapiripiri Ki Te Ika Nui a Maui. If you were to break away one of these scales, it sets a huge imbalance in papatuanuku. Down the bottom here, so I added this another una here, a really, really big one. So that was my bit of inspiration. It looks like some of those pressure ridges that are out there.
These 2 manaia, it carries on from Potama's wera or challenge, you know, looking after her, that to keep on talking. Our world leaders need to keep on talking to preserve not only this place, but to, you know, start nurturing papatuanuku a bit more. This here is Te Marama, the moon, and also talking to Regina about the moon. We're talking about our maramataka, what we call our seasonal calendar. Our days, our seasons are more guided by the moon and the seasonal change rather than a 7-day sort of week. It affects the water, it affects us, you know, it affects everything.
The name of this design is called the kupinga. Its story is around using an open cast net to only take or catch what you need, leaving what you don't need behind.
A taiaha is a weapon of war. Putting this foot piece on, lashed on here, it becomes a core. It's no longer a taiaha. A core is a tool that's used to help nurture, to help provide. Essentially a digging tool. You use it like a spade. This is a challenge for not just for us, but on behalf of the Indigenous people of the world, to say to the world leaders to put down your tools of destruction and start nurturing the planet, start nurturing the animals, start nurturing mankind.
Everyone that passes through here, purpose is really is that we'll become one whānau.
you know, all working together to the common cause.
What common values do we have in relation to looking after the Ross Sea Marine Protected Area and looking after Antarctica and the planet, of course, more broadly? And you can see that in the work that James and Potama have done. There was something really special about this project. It's a really beautiful way of thinking about the meaning of what we do, the value of scientific work. How do we come together to actually protect for future generations?
I think an important thing that I've learnt down here is everyone's sort of sharing their knowledge. I suppose some of our Indigenous people might have something to share as well.
My innermost being is screaming out that people take heed, that they take on the essence of Wairua. Our people relied on that heavily, because I think from that we can start moving forward.
E tukina no te whai oro tāne te wai ora, a tēnei te motatau kia aike, a whakatū tāre wa ki te rangi, uhi, wero, a tau mai te mau I a hui e hui, tāi ki e.
6 months on from the ice, I always get asked, you know, what was it like? Well, it must have been amazing, and I find it very hard to explain. The vastness of the place, the pureness of the place. The story is still there, it'll be there for a long time. And, you know, if it impacts one person, that's our job done. If it impacts more, that's even better, you know.
Since coming back from Antarctica, I think about it every day. Trying to explain it to people is quite tricky because it's just, yeah, it's absolutely another world.
Kia ora tātou. Is that you, Vanessa, that I can see on my screen?
I'm here now, so
yeah.
Yep.
So Vanessa, for those of you who didn't pick it up, was the filmmaker who put that beautiful film together. So I think Billy is now waiting for all your questions. So please, everybody, no question is too small or too trivial. We love answering questions. And I'm using a royal we there because I'm totally going to pass on all the questions to everybody else. But please send us your questions. Please get on the Q&A or on the chat and talk to us. So while you're quickly typing, V, you've talked about how going to Antarctica with Potama and James was a learning curve for you. Do you want to just give us a few insights on that?
Yeah. I've learned so much through doing this and then making the film as well. I didn't know anything about Whakairo before I went. And I suppose that I'm, you know, pretty indicative of a lot of Pākehā, sort of quite ignorant of mātauranga. And certainly my eyes have just been, you know, sort of peeled open and in the most beautiful way too. So I've learned a lot from James and Potes in not just the structural mechanical stuff of Whakairo. And my dad was a builder, so I suppose I kind of immediately kind of felt at home with them and with their tools and everything else. But it was that bigger part, it was the wairua that kind of went with this whole kaupapa that really, yeah, I just felt like I grew so much. I was very grateful. So yeah. But I do want to shout out, can I just shout out to the guy, to Ben Lemmy, who composed the score. And he's a Wellington-based musician. And he wrote it specifically for, you know, every note was composed specifically for that film. And he did the most beautiful job. I think he's Ngāti Porou, but I'm not sure. He's definitely a North Islander, so that's why I don't know. I'm distinctly mainlander. Yeah, and I just thought he did a beautiful job. He really sort of, yeah, fleshed out the film.
Okay, so James and Potes, actually and Te Warihi, we're coming back to you fellas now. So if you were thinking about what were some of the most important kaupapa for the Whakairo that you wanted to communicate more broadly, or the main things that you learned, or the most important things for you, what can you talk about some of that? So Te Warihi, I know we were talking before about the importance of mātauranga.
I think both Potama and James, wherever they disappeared to, have touched on in what they sort of expressed during the filming up there in Antarctica is, yeah, pretty close to what we wanted to portray. Because I think this was this was a huge opportunity and honor too, and meeting fellows like you, Matt, to have the opportunity to be able to begin, I guess, our coming together or understanding of, especially from a cultural perspective, in regards to science. And I say that in the way that you know, our ancestors weren't ignorant of science or technology. That was an integral part of our existence. Otherwise, we'd never have arrived here in the first place. But a huge part of that is the understanding of Te Wairua. Our people never saw a difference between Te Wairua, or the spiritual realm, and that of the physical realm. But they both relied on each other for common truth, if you can follow what I mean. And so having the opportunity to participate in this, and having the boys go, young James and Potama, to go up to the ice. Hey, I said up. Māori have a world view that Antarctica is at the top of the world. And Sandy, you fellas at the bottom. So I guess it's portraying that understanding, and I think the boys did well in finalizing, you know, in completing that concept while they were there on the ice. You know, James being able, both of them being able to talk to the scientists, and were able to adapt what they portrayed in their carvings from that experience they've had there. So, yeah. Not sure if I made sense or not, but hand it over to you, Potama, if you can hear.
Yep, can you hear? Yep, I can hear. Cool. Yeah, it was. Yeah, Matt was a huge. I mean, of course, the kaupapa came about a lot because of Matt and the work that Matt does with the Rossi, the ramp project, and the mahi he does with that. A big thing was in terms of when James was talking about the punga werewere and the spiders web. A big thing I took away from Matt's work was, and the connection between the punga werewere and what Matt does, is the ecosystem that is based down in Antarctica and in the Ross Sea, and we're privileged to see some examples of the ecosystem from Matt. You know, it's a complete spider's web of all these things that are totally interconnected to each other. The kind of a kaupapa, or the thought I wanted to get across and into the minds of everyone, is that, you know, you remove one of those things from that ecosystem, whether it be a toothfish or a penguin, or even the smallest thing like krill, it's totally devastating for that whole ecosystem would or could collapse. And that was a big part of my thought process going into the kaupapa, and the message I suppose I wanted to get through was the importance of us as a so not just the nation, but us as the world, to take note of that and to think, what am I doing to that could possibly be impacted, that could possibly impact that ecosystem. And I guess Matt could possibly explain a bit more as to what we are doing as people that is or could be damaging that ecosystem. So that was important for me, was the punga were within the Whakairo, and also on the other part of it was the unahi. And that's similar, like, yeah, it talks about it in the film where you remove one of those scales, and yeah, it could be devastation, but yeah.
I mentioned earlier what a huge honor this was, but I think, you know, with mātauranga tuku iho, or knowledge that was handed down through the generations, is not unique to us as Māori, but to every indigenous person on this planet is connected to that same philosophy. And, you know, even if we look at the history of England, it almost started in that indigenous space, or that the way that we view the world. And now I'm talking about the period of the Druids. You know, they weren't too dissimilar from the way we practice our culture. So yeah, again, big ups to you, Matt, for allowing us into the space, and to you too, Priscilla. Yeah.
Hey, look, Te Warihi, I'd just like to say that I think it's even more of an honor for scientists to be able to engage in a cultural space. So I just want to put that on the table, you know. I think for me, when I think about mātauranga, it's, as you say, it's not just knowledge, it's a knowledge system that encompasses worldview and values. And so it has an enormous amount to offer us as a society in terms of how we think and what our legacy is for future generations. So I think mātauranga is very powerful because it encompasses not only science, but also all of these other whakaaro as well. But just before we get James to comment, there's a few questions. The first one, Potes and James, you might want to answer this. Is it also important which sort of wood you use, and is it a part of the narrative of the carving?
For an environment like Antarctica, definitely important what would you use, and that we had to wānanga about that in terms of yeah, before we went down and before we chose what we were going to use. What they use now, I suppose, like all the expeditioners that went down in earlier times, use Australian redwood, because with the Antarctican environment, it is very, very dry, and the moisture there and anything gets sucked up instantly. So yeah, the wood selection was very important. So we went with a wood based from and available. Availability was another thing. So the harder the wood as well, from that Australian redwood, we took the harder the wood, the better. So we used a wood called Robinia, which is from South America. James used, I think James has dropped off, I'm not sure, but his piece he used Dimu and Tōtara. So two not so hardwoods, but it'd be interesting to see how they keep up down there in the conditions down there, whether they're still peace or not. If you would have seen in the video Fane's Po, the face of it, it's totally like there's cracks all down through it, and that happened as soon as they opened it up. I unpacked it when they got there, that the wood just opened straight up. So yeah, wood selection was very important. So hopefully, we don't know, haven't heard anything from the crew down there whether or not it's still looking all right or not. So yeah, hopefully it's still good. But that Robinia is extremely hard. It's very similar to the puriri tree. So yeah.
Kia ora, Potes. Hey, we've got a question for Te Warihi as well. One of our attendees says you're making very good sense. That's always good to hear, isn't it? But why is Antarctica at the top of the Māori worldview?
I guess on the planet it is, because I think the most important thing we start from is, in our whakapapa, is te kore. And that's what is at the top of our worldview, starting from io to te kore, te pō, all the way through. But then when we get to the planet, or to Papa Tuanuku, then we, through the work that has been carried out on the ice by the scientists from when they first started going there, was that Antarctica is a very important place. And the way I looked at it, it was the Antarctica was where you keep, or where you put your finger on the pulse of Papa Tuanuku. And that to me is a very good reason that we be there as part of the nurturing of Mother Earth.
Kia ora te Warihi. We've also got another question about birds that travel between Aotearoa and Antarctica. So the albatrosses would be one of the most famous groups of birds that do that. So there are quite a lot of different species that move across the oceans. So toro are very famous, of course, in Māori narratives. But also thinking more broadly, whales are another one that travel the entire Pacific. And some of that we can come back to. Matt is going to talk on Thursday, I think. And Jack also on Wednesday is going to talk about his experience fishing in the Ross Sea. So I'm sure some of these connections and some of these species will come up in that kōrero as well.
Was that a question for Matt? Or?
Oh, no, he can do it on Thursday. He'll have lots to say. Unless he wants to say something now.
Yeah.
Well, I really love the picture of the Ross Sea as being this huge interconnected web. And I was going to say that it's not just interconnected in the Ross Sea with the environment and the ice connecting to the animals and the animals connecting to each other, but it also spreads out across the Pacific and across the world. We're getting leopard seals from the Antarctic turning up in New Zealand. We're getting Weddell seals coming up from the Antarctic into New Zealand. The albatross across over, the sperm whales and the killer whales, they move from the Antarctic, from the Ross Sea back up to New Zealand. So we are too part of that whole web that stretches across the world. And we have a place for looking into the future of how we want to manage that and how we want to play our role in addressing the challenges of fishing and climate change and the other potential pressures on the Antarctic. And that's kind of what this is about, trying to get that dialogue going about what's our connection and what's our vision for the future. What should New Zealand be doing into that space internationally?
Okay, kia ora. Look, I'm aware we're running out of time, so thank you for that, Matt. Please send us questions the website if you have any more, but we're just going to go off and have a cup of tea because Sandy Morrison and Amy Kyle are going to be speaking at 3 o'clock about voyaging. And just to remind you that if you can't make it, that we will be recording them and the recordings will be available later. So please send us your feedback, and thank you all so much for coming. I'm just going to leave it to Billy and to Warihi to have some final words here.
Kia ora, thanks, Scylla. Yeah, I'd just reiterate that all of these seminars are happening over the next 4 days. So each day we'll have one at 1 p.m. and then one at 3 p.m. The plan was to go for 45 minutes maximum, but as we might expect, we've gone a little bit over. So apologies for that. And I see a few people did have to leave. We will try and stick to the 45 to an hour. We'll cap it at an hour. Yeah, I think, Scylla, you wrapped it up quite nicely there. So I'll just pass over to you, to Warihi, for karakia.
Yep. Koe no, e mihi anō tēnei kia koutou katoa. O koutou nei, kia tūna mai hoki o koutou nei taringa, o koutou nei kanui, o mata, ki tēnei kaupapa. Ko tai tātou nei, ki te hakamutanga o tēnei tātou nei kaupapa, ko tīmata raro hoki te manaki tango te rungaroa, ko tai atu hoki ki te atinga, ko karaki anō. A te rāno he kaitango ngā he mena watangi tū atu ti atu. Whakahuatia, whakanuitia te atu ko ia ki te atu ko te katoa ana pononga, ko te nohana te katoa i te mea nāna i whakaaro. A turuturu a tai, turuturu auta. A whano, haro mai te toki a hui e.
Ai,